The moment I walked through the airlock of way station Oran 743, aliens stopped. Moving, not slowed down, not turned to. Look, stopped completely, like someone had cut the power to every living thing. On that deck, I had a bag over one shoulder, a cup of recycled coffee in my hand, and a clearance badge that read, "Trade a third class." I was by every official measure the least important human being in this corner of the galaxy. My job was to sit in meetings, nod at the right times, and make sure the mineral exchange paperwork was filed before the quarterly deadline. Nobody stops for paperwork, people. I looked around. A VETH delegate near the welcome terminal had gone completely rigid, its 4 upper limbs pulled tight against its body. 2 Grenorders had dropped a cargo crate and were backing away from me slowly, their gills flaring wide open. A pair of Ulari diplomats, tall and silver-skinned and usually impossible to read, had pressed themselves flat against the far wall. One of them was making a sound I had never heard before from an Ulari. It was very quiet, it was very high-pitched, it sounded like fear. I looked behind me, nothing there, just the airlock door and the dark of space. Beyond the porthole, I looked back at all of them. "Hello," I said. 3 of the Grand turned and walked directly into a supply closet. The door slid shut behind them. I heard it lock from the inside. I stood there for a long moment holding my coffee. Then I walked to the welcome terminal, tapped my badge against the scanner, and waited for my room assignment to print. The VETH delegate was still frozen a meter to my left. Up close, I could see it was breathing very fast and very shallow. Its compound eyes, which normally tracked everything in a 30 degrees arc, were locked straight onto me. It was the look of something that had decided that if it did not move, perhaps I would not notice it. "You okay?" I asked. It made a clicking sound deep in its throat, then it said in standard, "You are Callum Ward." "That's what it says on the badge," I said. VETH made the clicking sound again. This one was longer. It sounded less like a greeting and more like a quiet private prayer. "My room assignment printed." I picked it up, tucked it under my arm, and headed for the lift. Behind me, I heard the entire deck slowly, carefully begin to breathe again. I found out what was going on approximately 6 hours later, when a VETH intelligence officer knocked on my door and let herself in. Without waiting for an answer, she was smaller than most VTH I had met with, deep amber markings on her upper carapace and a data tablet clutched in 2 of her 4 hands. She sat down in the chair across from my bunk without being invited, pulled up something on the tablet, and looked at me with the expression of a scientist who had just discovered something deeply inconvenient. "My name is Sue VTH, she said. "I am an analyst with the VATH Interspecies Intelligence Division. I have been assigned to observe you for the duration of your posting here." I was eating a nutrition packet. "Observe me, do what?" "Exist," she said primarily. I put the nutrition packet down. "Is there something I should know?" She turned the tablet around and showed me a file. It was thick, not digitally thick in the sense of a large number of documents, but thick in the sense of density, of weight, of history. There were reports from at least 9 different species. There were star charts with certain coordinates marked in red. There were images I recognized from years ago, from places I had been, from things I had seen and mostly forgotten about, and at the top of the file, in 11 different Scripps was my name. This is a galactic intelligence profile, Suvith said on. You personally. It is the 44th most accessed document in the Interesse's threat registry. The what? The Species threat registry, she repeated. Calmly, it is a shared intelligence archive maintained by the 6 major species alliances. It documents entities, events, and phenomena considered to be unpredictable risks to galactic order. She paused. The 43rd entry is a rogue dark matter anomaly that destroyed 4 star systems in the outer reach. I stared at her. She stared back. I file paperwork. I said, I am a third-class trade at I process mineral exchange agreements. Yes, said Suvith, we know that is. Frankly, one of the most alarming things about the file. I picked up the tablet and started reading. The first report was dated about 4 years back, filed by the Catherine Hive Intelligence Division. The language was formal and clipped in the way that Hive documents always were, but even through the translation, I could feel the weight of it. The report described an incident near the KE border. A human contractor who had been operating in a restricted transit corridor and the subsequent destruction of a KE listening post. The human had escaped. The post had not. The human in the report was me. I remembered that day very differently. The second report was from the Draw Collective, dated about 2 years ago. It described the disappearance of a deep space detention facility in the Marin cluster, the deaths of the facility's automated defense systems, and the liberation of 49 prisoners from 11 species. The suspected responsible party was listed as a single human operative working without support or authorization. That was also me. I also remembered that one differently. The third report was the one that made Suvith watch me very carefully as I read it. It was from a combined intelligence committee representing 4 species, and it described the collapse of the Dravari Syndicate's main command network. Clear's throat. The Dravari had operated in this region of space for 60 years. Their network had employed thousands. Their reach had extended into the governments of 3 separate stellar nations. And one day, over the course of about 72 hours, every node in their system had gone dark. The last known person to have contact with their command structure was listed as a human contractor named Callum Ward. I set the tablet down on my knee and thought about that week. I remembered it as one of the worst of my life. I remembered a broken navigation system, a wrong turn, a fuel shortage, and 3 days of being deeply, catastrophically lost in a region of space I had no business being in. I remembered making some very desperate choices, sending some very strange signals, and ultimately hitching a ride out with a cargo hauler who charged me 4 months of wages for the trip. I had not known until this moment that the signals I had sent while panicking had been interpreted by the Dravari security systems as a coordinated multi-vector cyber intrusion. I had not known that my desperate attempt to boost my ship's communication range had accidentally overloaded and destroyed 6 of their relay nodes. I had not known any of it. These are all accidents, I said. Yes, said Suvith, that is the part that concerns everyone. I looked up at her. Calculated enemy, she said carefully, can be understood. It has patterns. It has goals. It responds to incentives. It can be reasoned with, contained, predicted. She folded 2 of her 4 Hands on the table in front of her. Thing that destroys hive listening. Posts dismantles criminal networks and liberates detention facilities entirely. By accident without plan or purpose. While simply trying to complete routine tasks, that is something no one knows how to model. I'm not a thing, I said. No, she agreed, you are Callum Ward. Which is, depending on the species, either better or considerably worse. Door chimed. I got up and opened it. There was no one in the corridor, but sitting on the floor outside my door was a small data chip in a sealed Catherine diplomatic casing, the kind used for sensitive direct communications. Kieran casings were tamper-resistant, encrypted at 16 levels, and were typically only sent between heads of state. This one had my name on it. I picked it up, I turned it over, I looked up and down the empty corridor. I brought it inside. Suvith went very still when she saw it. She knew the casing type, every species did. I opened it. The message was short. It had been translated into standard already, which told me that whoever had sent it wanted to make absolutely certain I understood every word. 2 sentences, no signature, no greeting. Don't come. This is not a warning given to enemies. I read it twice. Then I looked at Suvith. The Queen, she said quietly, she sent that herself. The Catherine Queen sent me a personal message. Yes, telling me not to come to her territory. Yes, why would I go to her territory? I'm a third-class trade at a. Sue looked at me for a long moment, then she looked at the message, then she looked back at me. I have studied 47 species over a 20-year career, she said. I have read every major threat analysis ever produced by any intelligence division in this region of space. I have interviewed diplomats, generals, admirals, and heads of state. She paused. I have never in all of that time seen the Catherine Queen personally warn anyone about anything. I put the data chip down on the bunk beside me. She warned you, Suvith said, because the last 2 entities she failed to warn are no longer in any galactic registry, not as threats, not as anything. They are simply gone. She stood up, tucking the tablet under one of her arms. I would suggest, for whatever that is worth, that you take the message seriously. She moved toward the door. Suvith, I said. She stopped. What is this? Is not a warning given to enemies mean? She was quiet for a moment. In Catherine diplomatic language, she said, you warn your enemies because you want them to prepare. It makes the conflict more meaningful. A pause. You warn people you do not want to become your enemies because you do not want to find out what happens if they are. She left. I sat there for a long time after that. Room was quiet. The station hummed around me. Somewhere outside in the dark, 43 species were going about their business, and at least several of them had pulled up their emergency protocols. The moment my name cleared the airlock scanner, I finished my nutrition packet. I did not sleep well. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought I did not entirely like had taken root. I had never thought of myself as someone to be afraid of. I had never done anything on purpose. I had just survived. I had just kept going. I had just solved the problem in front of me with whatever I had. And when the problem was bigger than I expected, I had solved it. Messier, and then I had moved on. That apparently was enough. The name Callum Ward meant nothing to me. I had carried it my whole life without it meaning much more than a line on a form, a voice called across a room, a signature at the bottom of a page, to 47 species. It meant something else entirely. I was starting to understand that I did not yet know what the recycled air on Waystation Orange 7 tasted faintly of copper and synthetic pine the way most stations did, and I had learned in 3 years of contract work to sleep through the constant low vibration of the environmental systems. I had not, however, learned to sleep through the feeling of being watched. On my second morning, I woke up to find that the corridor outside my quarters had been quietly, unofficially cleared of all non-human traffic. The 2 grand porters who had their route past my door had been rerouted. The Olari diplomat who lived 3 doors down had requested a room transfer. The small cafeteria at the end of the deck, which typically served 12 different species at any given hour, had been empty when I arrived for breakfast at 7 station time. The serving staff, a polite veth named Oren for something, had taken my order without making eye contact and backed away from the counter rather than turning around. I ate my meal alone at a table built for 8. I was halfway through a bowl of something that was trying very hard to be oatmeal when Suvith appeared and sat down across from me with a data tablet and an expression of careful scientific neutrality. "You are aware," she said, "that 3 separate species delegations filed safety concern reports about your presence on the station last night." "Good morning to you too," I said. "The Ulari delegation cited proximity risk. The draw observer team requested your quarters be moved to a separate docking ring. The Href ambassador simply sent a photograph of your badge clearance and the single word no to the station administrator." I looked at my oatmeal adjacent substance. "And what did the administrator say?" "She said you had every legal right to be here and that she would not be moving you." Suvith paused. She said it from the far end of a very long corridor. I put my spoon down. I had been trying since the previous evening to approach this situation the way I approached everything else, practically calmly and without getting ahead of myself. The facts were the facts. There was a file with my name on it in a galactic threat registry. There were 3 events in my past that I had lived through as a series of bad days in which the rest of the galaxy had filed under something closer to catastrophe. And there was a message from a queen who had never personally warned anyone about anything in recorded galactic history. I was a third S trade at a who filed mineral exchange reports. The gap between those 2 things was where all my problems lived. "Tell me about the first incident," I said to Suvith. "Keth 1, what do their records actually say happened?" She turned her tablet around. The Kirin report was on the screen and she had highlighted the key section. Their listening post in Corridor 9 Alpha was a long-range intelligence node. It monitored transit traffic, intercepted commercial communications, and relayed data to 3 Hive command networks. It had been operational for 11 years. It was, according to Catherine intelligence, essentially undetectable. "I remember the corridor," I said. "My navigation unit had a faulty gyroscope. I drifted about 4 degrees off course during a micro sleep and ended up in restricted space before I knew where I was." The KE records describe a human vessel entering Corridor 9 Alpha with no running lights, no transponder signal, and no communication response for 14 minutes. I thought about that. Transponder got knocked offline when I Hit a debris field at the corridor. Entrance, I was trying to fix it. The KE. Duty officer interpreted the transponder. Silence and the extinguished running. Lights as an active stealth approach by. A hostile intelligence operative. My lights were off because I was running on emergency power while I rerouted the navigation. The duty officer scrambled a defense. Response: 4 automated sentry units were dispatched to intercept your vessel. She paused when they reached your last known position. You had moved. I got the navigation working again, I said. I corrected my course and accelerated out of the corridor. Your acceleration away from the sentry units was interpreted as evasive maneuvers. Following a surveillance mission, I was scared. I said, I didn't know what those things were. I thought they were pirate drones. When the sentries returned to the listening post, they reported that your vessel had briefly passed within 200 m of the post's primary antenna array. The electromagnetic pulse from your emergency power rerouting had at that range destroyed the array. I thought about that for a moment. The emergency power rerouting had involved my entire secondary system. I remembered a large spark. I remembered the lights flickering. I had not known there was a Catherine intelligence installation 200 m off my port side. I had not known it was there at all. So from their perspective, I said slowly, I entered a restricted corridor in stealth, destroyed their antenna array, evaded their defense response, and escaped without a scratch, with no support vessel, no weapon systems on record, and no formal military affiliation. Suvith said, yes, that is what the file says. I rubbed my face with both hands. The second incident, she said before I could respond, the Marin detention facility. Do you want me to read you the official account? I want to hear it, I said, because I remember it as the second worst week of my life. She read. Official account described a targeted infiltration of a heavily defended off-grid detention facility, the disabling of 6 automated defense turrets, the overriding of a biometric lock system, and the liberation of 49 prisoners before the facility's emergency shutdown sequence was triggered, collapsing the entire structure. What I remembered was a fuel stop at a station that turned out to be a front operation run by the Dravari Syndicate, a misunderstanding about a cargo manifest being shot at by people I had never met, running in a direction I hoped was away from the shooting, finding myself inside a very large building that turned out to be a prison, opening doors because I was looking for an exit, and ultimately escaping through a maintenance hatch while the building's power system, which I had accidentally fed too much voltage while trying to charge my emergency kit, did something extremely dramatic. The 49 prisoners had followed me out because they were smart enough to follow anyone who was moving confidently. I had not been moving confidently. I had been moving with the specific energy of a person who was completely lost and deeply committed to not showing it. The Dravari Syndicate filed a formal complaint. Suvith said they identified you from a facility camera image and submitted it to 6 intelligence agencies. That was how your file first began to grow. They complained about me. They requested that you be classified as a hostile agent and tracked. The irony is that by doing so they made your profile visible to every major intelligence network in this region of space. 3 different agencies pulled your prior records and found the Catherine incident, she paused, and then, of course there was the Divari network. I was lost, I said, for 3 days, And my communication array was trying to punch through their relay network. Because it was the only signal infrastructure in range, your communication array, in attempting to reach through their network, triggered 17 different security protocols across 14 nodes. Each protocol escalated the intrusion alert to the next level. Each escalation pulled more system resources. By the time you finally got a signal out and hitched a ride on that cargo hauler, you had caused a cascade failure through their entire primary communication backbone. Suvith set the tablet down. The Dravari network never recovered, she said. Without communications, their operation fractured. Their agents could not coordinate. Their payments could not clear. Their information pipeline collapsed. Within 4 months, the entire organization had dissolved. 60 years of criminal infrastructure dismantled in 72 hours by one human with a malfunctioning communication array. I looked at my cold oatmeal. You understand, Suvith said quietly, what this looks like from the outside. I understood. I had been alive long enough and in enough strange situations to understand exactly what it looked like. A person who slipped through Catharin's security like it wasn't there. A person who walked into a defended prison and walked out with 50 people behind them. A person who, while lost in, alone and running on fumes, managed to dismantle a galaxy-spanning criminal network by accident. That person was not a lucky civilian who kept ending up in bad situations. That person was, to the outside observer, something significantly more alarming. The galaxy doesn't believe in coincidence. I said. No, said Suvith. It believes in patterns, and you, Callum Ward, have a very consistent pattern. I thought about that. The thing was, I did not feel consistent. I felt tired most of the time. I felt like every difficult situation I had ever been in was simply a situation that needed to be gotten through one step at a time, one problem at a time, with whatever tools I had and whatever time I had to use them. I did not have a plan. I had never had a plan. I had a strong disinclination toward dying and a stubbornness that my mother had once described with great affection and mild frustration as genuinely alarming in a person your size. But I was beginning to understand that what felt from the inside like surviving looked from the outside like something else entirely. It was just after midday when the second attempt happened. I was in the station's lower transit corridor heading back from a meeting with the vet trade delegation that had gone smoothly and unremarkably in every way. The corridor was long and mostly empty, with cargo bays on both sides and a maintenance crawl space running along the ceiling. I had my bag over one shoulder, and I was thinking about filing my first report before the daily transmission window closed. I heard the maintenance hatch above me open. This is the part that I struggled to explain clearly, because from the outside what happened next probably looked deliberate. From the inside it was the result of several very small, unremarkable decisions. I heard the hatch. I stepped to the left because the corridor curved that way, and it was the natural direction of movement. A small device hit the floor approximately 1 meter to my right, bounced once and slid against the base of a cargo bay door. I looked at it. It was a droid signal disruptor, the kind used to incapacitate targets by overloading their neural implants. I did not have neural implants because I had always found them unnecessary, so even if I had stepped directly on the device, the effect on me would have been a loud buzzing sound and moderate disorientation. What happened instead was that the device designed for targets with implants received no feedback signal from me and began cycling through its range settings looking for a compatible neural signature. In doing so, it broadcast across 17 frequencies simultaneously, including the draw operative's own implant frequency. I heard a thump from inside the maintenance crawl space. I waited. Nothing else happened. I looked at the device. I looked at the ceiling. I picked up the device, put it in my bag, because it seemed valuable, and continued down the corridor to file my report. 2 hours later, Suvith found me in my quarters and told me that a draw operative had been found unconscious in the maintenance crawl space of the lower transit corridor, a victim of his own weapons signal feedback station. Security had reviewed the corridor camera. The footage showed me walking, stepping left, and then continuing on my way while the operative incapacitated himself in the ceiling above me. You didn't even look up, she said. I heard the hatch, I said. I thought it was maintenance. She stared at me. I did look up, I said. After the draw observer team is requesting emergency extraction from the station, she said. Their delegate submitted a report that described what they witnessed as, and I am translating this as directly as I can, precognitive threat deflection consistent with a Class 7 autonomous weapons intelligence. I stepped left, I said. Callum, she said, and it was the first time she had used my name directly, and she said it with the precise care of someone choosing their words with great accuracy. I need you to understand something. It does not matter what you did or did not intend. It does not matter whether this was coincidence, reflex, or luck. What matters is what every species on the station now believes they saw. She sat down across from me. You walked through an assassination attempt like it was not there, and you are sitting here talking to me about filing a report. I still need to file the report. She was quiet for a moment, then to her credit she made a very small sound that might have been a laugh from a Veth if Veth laughed. You are, she said, the most dangerous thing in this region of space. Not because you are trying to be, because you are not trying at all. I thought about that for a long time after she left. She was right, and I knew she was right, and the knowledge sat in my chest in a complicated way that I had no clean language for. I had not asked for the file. I had not asked for the profile or the reputation or the fear. I had just made decisions one after another in situations I had not chosen with the resources I had, and somewhere along the way, the universe had decided to build a legend out of the leftovers. The thing about a legend, I was learning, is that it does not care what you intended. It only cares what happened. And what happened in every case was that I was still here. That evening I sat on the edge of my bunk and looked at the data chip from the Catherine Queen. It sat on the small shelf beside my bunk, dark and sealed and perfectly still. Don't come. This is not a warning given to enemies. I turned the chip over in my fingers. I had been a contractor for 9 years. I had worked trade routes, supply runs, diplomatic crier services, and once briefly and regrettably hazardous material transport. I had never sought out danger. I had never wanted it. I had simply been the kind of person who, when the job in front of them was hard, did the hard job anyway. And when the situation got worse, found a way through, and when the way through looked impossible, found a way through anyway. Because the alternative was stopping. And stopping had never once felt like an option. That was not a power, it was not a skill, it was not a strategy, it was just what I was, but I was beginning to understand that what it looked like from 47 different species watching from a safe distance was something that could stop fleets, something that could walk through locked doors, something that could dismantle networks without knowing they existed, something that a queen in a civilization that had ruled its corner of space for 3,000 years felt the need to personally warn away. I set the chip back on the shelf. I opened my filing interface. I started writing the mineral exchange report outside through the small port hole above my desk. The stars were very old and very quiet and completely indifferent to what any of us thought we were. I filed the report. I turned off the light. I lay back on the bunk, and in the dark for the first time in a long time, I tried to think about what I was actually going to do next. The Ketherin home system was not on any standard transit chart. The coordinates existed in interspecies registry files under a special access classification, and accessing those files required a clearance level that I, as a third-class trade at a, did not officially possess. Suvith had the clearance. She also had, as she told me on the morning of my 4th day on the station, a professional obligation to observe me, and a personal philosophy that scientific curiosity, properly directed, was not technically the same thing as helping me do something inadvisable. "I am not helping you go," she said while showing me the coordinates. "I understand," I said, memorizing them. "I am simply conducting an observational study on how a subject responds to information in their environment." "Of course," I said, "the fact that you are looking at those coordinates and I am not stopping you is a function of my methodology, not my judgment." "Your methodology sounds very flexible," I said. "It has to be," she said, "when the subject keeps doing things that are not in any existing behavioral model." We left the station on a chartered transit vessel 2 days later. Suvith brought a research kit, 3 data tablets, and a change of clothing. I brought my bag, my navigation unit, and the data chip from the Queen. Neither of us discussed what we expected to find. Neither of us fully believed, I think, that we would be allowed to land. We were allowed to land. That was the first thing that surprised me. Kiran, the planet, was not what I had expected. I had expected something cold and fortress-like, world built for a species that ruled through fear and force. What I found was something older and stranger, a world layered in living architecture, structures that were not quite buildings and not quite organisms, growing from the deep soil and extending upward into a pale sky without apparent beginning or end. There was no obvious division between wild and constructed. The entire surface seemed to breathe. Our landing clearance had come through automatically, without communication or negotiation. A single coordinate set transmitted to our vessel with no accompanying message. It led us to a wide flat clearing near what appeared to be the edge of a very large enclosed structure, easily several kilometers across, with walls that curved and shifted slightly as we approached. Suvith, who had studied Kethar architecture extensively, was quiet for most of the descent. When we landed and the ramp deployed, she stepped out first and stood very still for a moment, looking at the structure. That is the primary chamber, she said. It is where the queen holds court. It is where decisions that affect the entire hive are made. A pause. No non-queen has ever entered it. Then why are we here? I asked. Because she invited us, Suvith said, which means she is the most scared of all of them. We walked. The entrance to the primary chamber was an opening in the living wall, tall and arched in. Absolutely silent, on either side stood Catherine drones, the large, heavily built ones used for defense and heavy labor, motionless in the way that Catherine drones became motionless when they had been told to hold position until otherwise instructed. They did not react as we passed between them. They did not shift or turn, only their eyes tracked us slowly and completely from entrance to interior. Inside, the scale of the place was difficult to process. The chamber was not lit in any way a human lighting system would recognize. Instead, the walls themselves produced a faint, even luminescence, warm and directionless, filling the space without shadow. Floor was smooth and slightly soft underfoot, like compressed moss. The ceiling arched far overhead in a pattern that looked random at first, and then the longer you looked at it, resolved into something deeply structured, a map or a record or a language that I did not have the background to read. At the far end of the chamber, elevated on a natural growth of the same living material as the walls, was the queen. I had seen images, every galactic intelligence file on the Catherine included photographs of the queen taken from surveillance drones or long-range optical equipment, always from a distance and usually through at least 2 layers of atmospheric interference. Those images had given me a shape and outline, an approximate sense of scale. They had not given me her presence. She was larger than the images suggested, not impossibly so, but enough that the first thing I felt walking toward her was the animal, wordless awareness that I was standing in the presence of something that had been alive longer than any institution I had ever belonged to, snorts longer than any government I had ever served, longer than any tradition I had ever been taught to respect. She was completely still. The drones around the base of her elevation were completely still. The entire chamber was completely still. Suvith had stopped walking. I realized after a moment that she had stopped several meters behind me. When I looked back at her, she made a small, careful gesture with one hand that communicated as clearly as any language that she felt I should continue and she would remain where she was. I continued. I stopped at what seemed like a reasonable distance from the elevation, close enough to communicate, far enough to demonstrate that I was not advancing further without invitation. The queen looked at me. The translator note I carried, a small device clipped behind my ear, was the standard diplomatic model issued to all interspecies personnel. It handled about 96% of known active languages and about 70% of Catherine's standard dialect. What came through it when the queen spoke was not a clean translation. It was more like an impression, a shape of meaning, pressed into recognizable language, the way a handprint in soft clay communicates a hand without being one. You are smaller, the queen said then. The file suggests Most things are, I said. A pause then. Something that may have been. Acknowledgement. You came, you said not. 2. I did. Another pause longer. That was information, not instruction. We do not instruct things we are afraid of. The word afraid landed differently then. I expected it to, not with embarrassment or apology, as a fact stated with the complete directness of a species that had not evolved the social reflex of hiding what was true. What are you afraid of? I asked. Queen was quiet for a long time. The chamber was so still that I could hear Suvith breathing behind me, faint and careful. We are not afraid of what you have done, the Queen said. The incidents in your file are individually explicable. The listening post was a technical failure compounded by misread information. The detention facility was a systems cascade caused by an outside power source. The Dravari network was a communication overload. A pause. We know this. Then what is the fear? I asked. We are afraid of what you are, she said. Not what you have done, what you are. The translator struggled with the next part. What came through was approximate, assembled from pieces of Kiran conceptual language that did not map cleanly to standard, but the shape of the meaning was clear enough. The Queen said that her hive had existed for 3,000 years. In that time it had encountered many species. Some were stronger, some were more intelligent, some had more advanced technology or larger populations or deeper resources, but every species and every encounter followed a predictable shape. They grew, they stabilized, they reached a point of equilibrium, and within that equilibrium they became understandable. Their responses to pressure were predictable. Their thresholds for conflict were mappable. Their limits were visible. Humans had no visible limits, not because humans were stronger or smarter or better equipped, but because humans, in 3,000 years of Kiran observation, had never once responded to a threat the way they were supposed to. They did not reach equilibrium. They did not stabilize into predictable patterns. They adapted faster than any model could track. They survived things that should have ended them, not through superior force, but through a refusal to accept that the situation was as serious as it was. They found solutions in conditions where solutions should not exist. They kept going when every calculation said stopping was the only rational option. Species that cannot be modeled, the Queen said, cannot be contained. Species that cannot be contained cannot be governed. A species that cannot be governed is to any civilization that has built itself on order. The translator paused. What you would call dangerous. I stood there and listened to this. I had no immediate response to it because it was not an accusation, and it was not a threat, and it was not even quite a warning. It was an explanation. It was a very old, very powerful ruler looking at me across the floor of a chamber that no outsider had ever entered, and explaining with complete honesty what I looked like. From where she stood, I thought about what to say for a long time. I have never done any of the things in that file on purpose. I said, we know, she said. Every one of those situations was an accident. We know. I was just trying to get through. I was just doing what was in front of me. Yes, she said, that is what we are afraid of. And then she told me about the draw fleet. The information arrived not as a formal briefing, but as a single clear statement, delivered without ceremony in a chamber full of stillness. 3 days out, 200 draw warships destination way station or in 7. I stood very still. When the Queen said it, the draw had been building to this for longer than I had been in this part of space. Their grievance was not primarily with me, although my presence on the station had apparently accelerated their timeline. Their grievance was with the station itself, which served as the primary diplomatic hub for 6 species they considered either threatening or insufficiently submissive, and with the soft coalition of interests it represented, destroying the station would send a message that no alliance, no shared registry, no mutually beneficial trade agreement was strong enough to protect those who sheltered inside it. The station held at last count diplomatic personnel from 41 species. It held researchers, trade staff, cultural exchange delegates, and a small permanent population of non-affiliated residents who had simply chosen to make it home. "What will you do?" I asked the Queen. "Nothing," she said. I looked at her. "We will not intervene. The draw are within their right of passage under the outer reach accords. We have no formal treaty with the station. Intervention would require us to choose a side in a conflict that does not concern the hive." The translator carried something that was not quite emotion, but was adjacent to it. "We are watching to see what you do." "Me?" I said. "You," she said. "The file says you solve problems that should not be solvable. The file says you survive things that should not be survived." Pause. "The file is either true or it is a legend. We wish to know which." I thought about that. I thought about it with the cold, clear part of my brain that kicked in during bad situations. The part that did not panic, not because it was brave, but because panic had never once solved anything, and I had learned that young and kept relearning it. "If I do nothing," I said, 41 species worth of diplomatic staff die. "Yes, and if I do something, then either the file is true," the Queen said, "or it is not." I turned and walked back towards Suvith. She had heard everything. Her amber carapace markings were darker than usual, a physiological response to stress in Veth that she would have preferred I not notice. She said nothing. As I reached her, she simply fell into step beside me, and we walked back through the living walls and out into the pale light of the Catherine sky. At the bottom of the ramp I stopped. I thought about the station. I thought about 1,200 ships. I thought about 3 days. I had no fleet. I had no weapons system. I had a chartered transit vessel, a vet intelligence analyst, 1 bag of personal equipment, and a reputation I had accumulated entirely by accident. "Tell me everything you know about the Draw Fleet command structure," I said. Suvith looked at me for a moment, then she climbed the ramp. "I will make tea," she said. "This will take a while." We lifted off from Kethirin just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the living architecture of the surface in colors that had no names in standard. Below us, the primary chamber was already still again. The Queen was already gone, back into the hive, back into the deep collective mind of 40 billion lives waiting. I had 3 days and a legend that was not quite mine. It would have to be enough. I had spent the first 2 hours of the return flight staring at a star chart and asking Suvith questions, and the picture that emerged was not encouraging, but it was not, I thought, impossible. The Draw Fleet was big. 1,200 ships was not the largest military force in this region of space, but it was more than enough to take apart a civilian way station with no defensive armament and no treaty protection. Their admiral, a figure named Gretel, had a reputation for methodical operations, not quick, aggressive strikes but slow, deliberate advances that gave no room for improvisation by the defending side. He was predictable in that way. He was also, Suvith told me, deeply superstitious. Superstitious, I said. It is a significant element of draw military culture, she said, looking up from her tablet. The belief that certain individuals carry a kind of inherent fate, a gravity, events cluster around them. Opposing them does not simply risk defeat, it risks becoming part of their story. I thought about that. And what does the draw registry say about me? She turned the tablet around. The draw threat assessment was different from the Catherine file. It was not clinical. It was not analytical. It was written in the way that draw military documents were always written, with a heavy emphasis on pattern and consequence, and what they called in their own language the weight of a name. The assessment described me as, and Suvith translated this carefully, an entity around which catastrophic outcomes aggregate for opposing forces. It cited the 3 incidents. It noted that in each case, the forces opposing me had been larger, better equipped, and operating from positions of advantage, and that in each case those advantages had proven irrelevant. They think I'm bad luck, I said. They think you are significantly more than bad luck, Suvith said. In draw conceptual terms, you are closer to what they call a thread breaker, a presence that disrupts the expected flow of events so completely that no opposing plan survives contact with you. I sat back in my seat. The transit vessel hummed around us. Outside, the stores moved slowly past. I need to use that, I said. I am aware, Suvith said. I am also aware that what you are about to do is entirely made up, and that the structural integrity of this plan depends on no one calling your bluff. Then let's make sure no one can afford to call it, I said. We worked through the night. Suvith had access to VTH intelligence archives and diplomatic communication networks, and she had the analytical mind of someone who had spent 2 decades turning incomplete information into accurate pictures. I had a very clear understanding of every mistake I had ever made that had been misread as brilliance. Together we began constructing something that was technically not a lie, but was also not, in any meaningful way, the truth. The first piece was the easiest. Suvith pulled the after-action analysis that 3 different intelligence agencies had filed following the Dravari network collapse. She highlighted the sections where analysts had speculated about whether the collapse had been a coordinated operation or a single actor event, and whether the single actor interpretation suggested the existence of a previously unknown human intelligence capability. I wrote a supplementary document, not forged, just unrequested, that appeared to be an internal Earth Defense Command memo discussing in vague but weighted terms a special operational protocol that had been activated in the Marin region during that period. It was vague because I was making it up. It was weighted because I was very good after 9 years of contract work at writing the kind of document that sounded like it was hiding specific information while containing almost none. The second piece was harder. The draw fleet communication security was sophisticated, but Suvith had, through entirely legitimate intelligence channels, access to the encryption keys used for draw external diplomatic transmissions. Internal tactical transmissions were different but external facing. Communications, the ones used for pre-conflict warnings, terms of engagement and high-level command. Correspondence could be accessed. I did not send anything, not yet. I needed them to receive, not transmit. I needed them to find. The third piece was the one that Suvith called with precise disapproval, either a very clever trap or a monument to recklessness. I filed a ghost arrival record at way station Orange 7. Timestamp 36 hours before we were due to return using a secondary contractor ID I had carried for years for administrative rerouting purposes. The record was clean and unremarkable. It logged a single standard-ass vessel docking at a service bay on the station's outer ring, the pilot listed as a subcontractor whose name would not appear in any registry because I had constructed that name for exactly this kind of situation years ago, and the cargo listed as classified under Earth Defense Command standing orders. The record existed. No ship had actually docked, but the record existed in the station's arrival log, and arrival logs were one of the data sources that draw advanced intelligence regularly accessed when approaching a target. When their intelligence officers pulled the arrival log, and they would pull it, standard procedure was to pull all traffic records for a target station in the 48 hours prior to an operation. They would find evidence that something had arrived quietly and without announcement, classified under a standing order that would match the supplementary memo I had written. They would not find a ship. They would not find a person. They would find an absence where a record said something should be, and in intelligence work, a deliberate absence is always more alarming than a presence. You are going to make them believe, Suvith said, slowly working through it out loud, that you are already at the station. Already at the station, already in position, already prepared. I said, before they get there, before they expect anyone to be there, and if they check further, then they find one more layer of nothing, and in intelligence, one layer of nothing might be luck. 2 layers of nothing is a cover. Suvith was quiet for a moment. You have done this before, she said. It was not quite a question. I have been lost in bad places a lot, I said. You learn which parts of the dark to put things in. On the morning of the third day, I recorded the voice message. I had thought about it for a long time. I had drafted it in my head during the last sleep cycle, revising it the way I revised everything, not for effect but for accuracy. I wanted every word to be true. I needed every word to be true, not because I was committed to honesty as an ideal in that moment, but because if a single word rang false, to draw intelligence officer trained to identify deception, the entire structure collapsed. The message was 43 seconds long. It began with my name stated clearly and without any other introduction. Then it said the following, which I will reproduce here as closely as I can remember it. I am aware of the fleet's position and heading. I snorts. Am aware of the operational timeline. I am aware of the strategic objective. I was aware of each of these things before your advanced intelligence team reached this region. I have been in this kind of situation before, and the people on the other side of it have, without exception, made the same decision your admiral is considering now. I am not asking you to believe that I can stop 1,200 ships. I am asking you to consider whether, given My file, any outcome you have modeled for this operation is the one that will actually occur. You know what I walked out of, you know what I walked through. I have been at these coordinates since yesterday. I will be here when you arrive. I recorded it. I listened back to it once, then I sent it on a direct channel to the Draw Fleet Command communications array. Then I sat back and ate a protein bar. Suvith was looking at me from across the small cabin. That last line, she said, you have been at these coordinates since yesterday. Yes, you have not been at those coordinates since yesterday. No, I said, we are currently 8 hours out. So that is a lie. That is the only lie in the message. I said everything else is true. She was quiet for a moment, thinking it through. They cannot verify whether you are there or not without diverting a scouting vessel, and diverting a scouting vessel tips their hand and delays the operation. And the longer the delay, the more time they have to think about what I just said. I said, yes, we came out of the transit jump 5 hours later, and way station or 7 was exactly where it was supposed to be, lit up against the dark like something very small trying to be brave. On long range sensors, Suvith showed me the fleet, 1,200 ships deployed in a wide arc. They were not advancing. They were holding position. I docked the transit vessel at the outer ring, walked through the airlock, and went directly to the monitoring center on level 3, where the station administrator, a compact and extremely calm woman named Paula Wren, was standing in front of a sensor array looking at the same fleet I had been looking at from space. She turned when I came in. She looked at me. For a moment, she did not move away from me, which I was beginning to appreciate as a sign of either courage or exceptional professional discipline. They stopped 4 hours ago, she said. No communication, no warning transmission, no statement of intent. They deployed the arc and then they stopped. I know, I said. She looked at me for another moment. Is that because of you? I sent them a voice message, I said. She waited 43 seconds, I said. Paula Wren looked at me, then at the sensor display, then back at me. She had the expression of someone doing very rapid mental arithmetic and not being entirely comfortable with the result. What did you say to them? She asked. The truth, I said, mostly. Suvith came in behind me, dropped her research kit on a chair, and immediately began pulling data from the station's sensor array. I leaned against the wall and watched the fleet on the display. 1,200 ships, 4 hours of holding position. The minutes moved slowly. Then, on the display, the arc began to contract, not advancing, consolidating. The outer ships drawing back toward the center formation, the arc tightening into a column, and the column, after a long and careful moment, turning away. They were leaving. Paula Wren let out a breath. Behind me, I heard other staff in the monitoring center react quietly and collectively in the way people react when they have been holding a great deal of tension for a very long time and are suddenly, unexpectedly allowed to release it. I watched the fleet until it was gone from the sensor display. Then I sat down on the floor, back against the wall, and ate the second half of my protein bar. Suvith crouched next to me. She was watching me with a particular attention of a researcher, observing something that did not fit any existing category. Are you all right? She asked. My hands are shaking, I said. I know, she said. I can see that. I was not certain that would work. I said I was maybe 60% certain, 65. And if it had not worked, I thought about that, then we would have had about 4 hours to think of something else, I said. Suvith made the small sound again, the one that might have been a Veth laugh. You are remarkable, she said, not in the way the file says, in a way the file is completely unable to capture. Tired and lucky, I said. No, she said. You are the kind of person who, when the situation is worst, becomes most like themselves, not louder, not larger, just more completely exactly who you are. She paused. That is what the galaxy cannot model. It is not your actions, it is your consistency. I sat on the floor of the monitoring center and thought about that for a while. Outside in the dark, the fleet was going home, whatever home meant to 200 ships that had just turned away from a station because of a 43-second voice message from one person sitting on a floor eating a protein bar. I did not fully understand any of it, but I was still here. That had always been enough. Before the formal after-action report, filed 2 days later by Way Station or in 7 Station Command, described the draw fleet withdrawal as a result of diplomatic communication channels and strategic deterrence measures. It did not name me specifically. Paularin had made that choice, and I thought it was probably the right one. The informal record was considerably different. By the time I returned to my quarters on the evening after the fleet withdrew, I had received 41 incoming messages from individuals and organizations across 9 species. Most were short, several were not in languages my translator could fully handle. One was in a format that appeared to be pure mathematical notation, and which Sue dashed after 40 minutes of analysis concluded was an extremely formal expression of relief from a species that did not have a social concept equivalent to gratitude, and had done their best with what they had. I did not respond to most of them. I did not know what to say that would not make things worse. The message I spent the most time thinking about was the one that arrived on the 3rd day after the withdrawal, in a sealed Catherine diplomatic casing identical to the first one, same tamper-resistant construction, same 16-level encryption, my name on the outside in the same careful script. I opened it. One symbol, no text, no translation. I brought it to Sue Dash. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. What does it mean? I asked in Keith informal diplomatic language. She said this glyph is used in exactly one context, when the hive acknowledges that an individual or event has affected the shape of things in a way that the hive did not anticipate and cannot fully calculate. She looked up at me. It does not mean respect. It does not mean gratitude. It does not have a direct equivalent in standard. A pause. The closest translation is acknowledged, as in you are seen, as in we have updated our understanding of what is possible. I looked at the glyph. It was small and angular and carried no particular visual drama. It was the kind of mark that could easily be overlooked. I kept it. The reassignment came through 4 days later, delivered by Paula Wren in person, which I thought was either a courtesy or a warning. She sat across from me in the small cafeteria, which was now fully operational and entirely populated. Again, the various species delegations, having concluded that I was for the moment not an active threat to their well-being. Earth Defense Command has issued a new posting, she said, effective immediately. The location is classified at a level above what I can access, which tells me more about what it is than the actual classification does. Higher than your access, I said. My access covers most things, she said. I thought about that. What's the official reason? Transfer to a role better suited to your current profile, she said, which is the kind of language they use when they need someone somewhere specific and cannot explain in writing why that person is the one they need. So I'm being promoted into a classified problem. I said that would be my reading. She said the paperwork describes it as a senior advisory role in interspecies relations. A pause. No one in interspecies relations has ever needed a classified posting before. I signed the transfer papers that afternoon. Sue-VTH found me in my quarters afterward, packing my bag. She stood in the doorway and watched for a moment. You are leaving, she said, apparently to a classified location. Apparently, she came in and sat in the chair. She had her tablet as always, but she was not looking at it. She was looking at me with the particular focus she used when she was deciding something. I am filing my research notes, she said. The working title is still the same, Why Humans Should Not Exist But Keep Doing So Anyway, I said. The subtitle has expanded, she said. It is now a study in catastrophic luck, adaptive stubbornness, and the galaxy's persistent failure to account for individuals who treat the end of the world as a logistical problem. I stopped pinging and looked at her. She shrugged, which was not a Veth gesture, but which she had picked up, I suspected, from too many hours observing humans. It is a working title, she said. The core argument is that your species does not survive through strength or strategy. You survive because you refuse at a fundamental level to accept that the situation is as bad as it is. You keep making the next decision and then the next one, and the gap between what should stop you and what actually stops you is, she paused, to the rest of the galaxy. That gap is what fear looks like. I thought about that. That sounds like a limitation. It sounds exactly like a limitation, she agreed. From the inside, from the outside, it looks like something that cannot be stopped. I finished packing. I slung my bag over my shoulder. Sudashvath, I said. She looked at me. Thank you for the coordinates for the research kit for the T. A pause for the 65% plan. It was a 62% plan, she said. I rounded up for your benefit and it worked. I said. It worked, she said. This time she stood. She walked to the door, then she stopped the way she always stopped and said the last thing. There is one more file, she said. I did not mention it before because I was not certain how to contextualize it. It arrived in the VETH Intelligence Archive 3 days ago, routed through a signal relay in the deep outer band. Non-standard encoding, origin unidentified. She turned slightly but did not quite look at me. The transmission was addressed to the Galactic Diplomatic Network and was, as far as we can determine, the first signal ever transmitted by the originating source. What did it say? In broken standard, she said. The translation quality is low, so there is interpretive room, but the phrase appears repeatedly in the signal. She paused. We know that name. The room was quiet. I said. The signal came from beyond the outer reach. Sue-VTH said. We have no record of any civilization in that region. No survey data, no contact history, nothing. She finally looked at me directly. Whatever sent that signal has never spoken to the Galaxy before, the first thing they chose to say was that they knew your name. I stood there for a moment, then I picked up my bag. Forward that file to my new posting, I said, whatever the address ends up being. Sudesh nodded. Once, I walked out of the room down the corridor and toward the docking ring. Around me, way station Orange 7 moved and breathed and hummed the way any inhabited place does, full of small, ordinary life, the kind of life that does not make it into galactic threat registries and does not receive messages from undiscovered civilizations at the edge of known space. Good life, regular life. The kind worth not letting 1,200 ships destroy. The transport to my new posting was already docked and waiting. The pilot, a young woman named Frances, gave me the particular look I had become accustomed to, not fear exactly, but the careful stillness of someone recalibrating their expectations in real time. She took my bag without being asked, stowed it in the cargo compartment, and showed me to the forward cabin with the efficient courtesy of someone who had been very well briefed. I sat down, I buckled in. I looked out the porthole at the station's outer ring, at the service bays and docking clamps, and the faint reflection of stars in the hull panels. I thought about a queen in a living chamber who had told me the galaxy was afraid of what I was, not what I had done. I thought about 43 seconds of recorded voice turning 1,200 ships around. I thought about a glyph I could not read, and a symbol that meant acknowledged, and a signal from something that should not have known my name. Frances came over the intercom. We were cleared to depart. The station fell away behind us. The stars came forward. Somewhere out past the outer reach, past the edge of every chart any civilization had ever drawn, something had powered up its transmitter for the first time in its history. Something had looked at the available information about the galaxy it was preparing to encounter. Something had decided that the first thing worth saying was not a greeting, not a declaration, not a demand. It had said a name, my name. I pulled the new posting file up on my personal unit. The details were sparse in the way that classified documents are always sparse, all context removed and only the bare skeleton left. Location, timeline, primary contact. The role description was one sentence. Consult and advise on emerging interspecies risk scenarios as directed. I had never consulted or advised on anything in an official capacity. I filed reports and moved cargo and tried not to accidentally destroy criminal networks while being lost, but then I had also never officially done any of the things in that threat file. I put the unit away. I leaned back. I looked at the dark ahead of us, full of distances too large to name, full of species still unknown, full of problems that had not introduced themselves yet. Something out there knew my name. I was not afraid. I was not brave either. I was just the person who was here, and the problem was out there. And the space between those two things was the only distance that had ever mattered. I closed my eyes. When I opened them, we would be somewhere new. And whatever was waiting there would have to deal with the fact that I was not going to stop. I never had. I was human. It was the only thing I knew how to be.